I think we're with you now. Sorry to make all 821 of you wait for this. Took a few minutes to solve something, but I think we're good now. So I'm going to try to limit my comments to about 25 minutes or so. Not sure exactly how long it will be, but I'd like to leave as much time for Q&A as possible. There's 8 sections. Let me just tell you what those look like so that you'll know where I am. And as I go through each section, I'll tell you where I am so that you'll be able to parse out your attention span. So, first, I'm going to start with the larger context. Second, the specific impact on your firm. Third, how to navigate this for yourself. Fourth, more on remote work. How do you handle that internally? Fifth, staffing considerations. Sixth, some financial metrics to watch, particularly in this time. And seventh, your role as a leader. And then finally, eighth would be a few considerations. So I'm going to dive right in. I know you've been reading all kinds of things about the coronavirus, which is actually the virus that causes the disease, COVID-19. So I probably should have named this something else, but I think you know what we're talking about here. So putting this in context, there's a lot to think about here, right? What's the best way to plan for this? How do you think about what needs to happen next? So let's do that, okay? From my own standpoint, I lived through a civil war in Guatemala City, up in the highlands of Guatemala, which really prepared me for thinking through issues like this. And then, of course, most of us have been through what happened in 2008 and then more recently in 2001. This might change as we think about the impact on the world that we live in. It might impact our political stance on trusting institutions. It's been interesting to see what's happened there. Immigration, although that's really not a factor in this. Freedom of the press, urbanization, reshoring, and so on. One of the things that strikes me as so important here is to understand the difference between all of the science behind this that we're facing and people's reaction to it. It's similar to how you might think about the stock market. So you're not buying stock based just on the fundamentals of that stock. You're buying stock based on how other people are going to interpret those fundamentals. So in your business, you could understand exactly what's happening from a scientific standpoint, but the people, the CMOs, the presidents, the folks that are making decisions to hire you might have a different perspective. So you really have a twofold task here to understand what's happening, what's real, but also to understand how people are reacting to that. And it's just an important consideration to think about. I want to draw your attention to a few things that I found particularly balanced and useful. One is an article in the Washington Post. If you just search for Spanish flu 1918, you'll find it. And I'm going to send you links to all these after the webinar is done. The second is one written by a gentleman in the UK in London. His publication is called Exponential View. And if you search for coronavirus on the Latin Bridge, you'll find it. And then the guidelines in the New York Times about self-quarantine, that whole process I found be particularly useful. And then if you monitor Johns Hopkins infographic page, that was very useful as well. As an industry, and this is really, really critical, it may be one of the most critical things, it's this, that we are a lagging indicator to what's happening in the market around us. So the problem in not recognizing that is that you may see what's happening at your business and see the panic that's hitting folks around you and think that you are sort of escaping the implications of this when in fact they just simply haven't caught up to you yet. We're a lagging indicator, so whatever's happening in your business right now is more a reflection of the marketplace 2 months ago, not so much what's really going to happen down the road. So as you look at the panic and some of what's occurring in the businesses out there, you can assume that that sort of same perspective will hit you 2, 3, 4 months away. But worse than that, when the economy begins to put itself back together, it will take another 2 to 4, sometimes even 5 months for that impact to catch up and repair what's happening for you. If you think about the economic impact back in 2008 and all the jobs that were lost at that point, we didn't rise to that level, pre-2008 level, until 2014. So it took 6 years for us to replace all the jobs that were left, that were lost back in 2008. Our industry wasn't hit. It didn't take that long to recover, but it was hit very, very badly. But it was hit late, and then it recovered late as well. So just think about that as you ponder how this impacts your own planning. I do think that the industry will fully recover. Kind of. I don't think that it will fully recover for the holding companies. I would expect that one, maybe two of those would be bought by somebody else or merged. But I think for those of us, the small folks, I think the industry will fully recover. But we'll leave many weaker firms behind. And, in that wake, the new ones will grow from that mess. So it's going to be bad for individuals. I don't think it will be bad for the industry as a whole. And I don't mean to minimize that pain, but just keep in mind that lag. It's so important, 3 to 5 months, so your business won't get terrible until 3 to 5 months after it gets terrible around you, and then it won't recover fully after that either. The ones who never recover, in other words, they hang around and struggle, and then they reach this tipping point that they can't reach back across. Those are the ones who either borrow too much money, and so when the other firms around them in the industry are recovering, they can't because they're still servicing debt, or they simply wait too long, and specifically they wait too long to adjust staff levels, and we'll talk about that. That's why I'm going to include that topic as one of the specific 8 ones. Now, next section is a look at the specific impact on your firm. This is the second of 8 sections. We lose 10 to 15% of all of the firms in this space in any given year. I would expect that we'll lose at least double that, so anywhere from 20 to 30%. Those are the firms that aren't well positioned. They don't have a good lead generation plan. They're building on a bad positioning. They borrow too much money. They don't lay people off soon enough. Those are the kinds of firms that are going to struggle. And so that's not catastrophic, but it's obviously really impactful to the industry. Meanwhile, the market, the streets will have extra freelancers from 3 sources. Mainly those freelancers are going to come from the independent shops, the shops that are listening to this. Then the next probably biggest group will come from the holding companies, the 5 or the 6, depending on how you count the 6th one. And then the smallest group will come from employees on the client side. On the client side, they'll be the slowest to lay people off, but there will be some layoffs for sure. In fact, there's been a slight reversal. Over the last about 4.5 years, the client side folks have been building up their capabilities with in-house departments. And some of those firms are discovering that it's not quite as green on that side of the fence as they thought it was, and they're disbanding those departments. I would expect that some of those clients are going to take another look, and they'll probably use the crisis around them as an excuse to lay off a whole bunch of folks at once. But their structures around body count are a lot more rigid than they are at independent firms or the holding companies. I think many of the freelancers that will flood the streets because of that will retain work from their former employees. In fact, that's usually how folks will ease the pain, is they'll say, all right, bad news, we have to let you go. The good news is we still need some of what you do. So could we be your next big client? And, that will represent often 1/3 to 1/2 of their work capacity. But once their health insurance runs out, that's going to be difficult for them. So I doubt if I'm speaking to too many potential freelancers here at the moment. It's mainly COOs and principals and partners here. But I would say that, and this is just a comment to the side, that one of the things that's harming the entrepreneurial side of this field more than anything is the lack of health insurance. There are a lot more people would be in the freelance or running small firms if they could solve that issue. And that solution, at least in the U.S., is not coming anytime soon, in spite of what you're hearing in the political arguments. You will have, because of that, more flexible contractors at your disposal. I think that's a good thing. On the other hand, there'll be more downward pressure on pricing, because particularly if they've used somebody and they're considering using somebody they have a relationship with who's now a freelancer or using you, there's not that much risk in them using a freelancer they know. And so whatever that freelancer charges, whether it's 80 or 90 bucks an hour, that's a whole lot less than what you might charge them at 160 or 180, something like that. Some industries will obviously be cut a lot deeper than others, which is going to impact how much your particular firm suffers. So if you're positioned in an area, one of those 9 or 10 or 11 areas that I've identified, and I'll talk about in a few minutes, that are going to be hit harder, then obviously your sales will be hit harder. But I think on average, I would expect that firms, their sales numbers will drop somewhere between 10 to 20% for 2020 instead of whatever growth they were projecting, which is usually 10 to 15%. So we're talking about roughly a 30% drop at its worst. You'll face less pressure to defend as the incumbent as RFPs are postponed. So what I'm hearing on the client side is that many firms who wanted to conduct a review and put the relationship up for bid again are deciding that this is not the right time to do it. So if you are one of the firms that are serving that client, then your status with them may not be protected permanently, but I think it won't be disrupted now. It might be another year before that's disrupted. So if you get this spidey sense that maybe your relationship is ending, I think this is probably good news, that it may not end as soon as it otherwise would, because firms are just deciding to pick their battles and live with some of the things that are not entirely happy with. Certain industries will be hit harder, and these are a little bit obvious, but it's still worth mentioning because there may be something new in here. So obviously the ones that will be hit harder are anything to do with travel, tourism, entertainment, field marketing, which is a service offering, a service design package for this field. Any firm like yours who might focus on fast-growing VC funded would be impacted. The whole experiential, anything that relates to trade shows and an in-person sales force that involves travel will be difficult. Anything with complex supply chains, particularly as we're seeing what's happening with China, and then anything that would require an in-person meeting. And by that, the best example of that would be higher ed, of course, but there are lots of examples that would involve this. So given this third section here, how might you